the US bumped its tariff on Canadian goods to 35%. How big of an impact will it have? Well, in just 4 months, more than 140,000 tons of Canadian potatoes have stopped flowing into the US. The reason? Recently, Washington imposed a 35% tariff on potatoes imported from Canada. The impact hit faster than a rushed lunch. A $22 bag now costs nearly $30, and a McDonald's fries that used to be $3.29 in the Midwest has jumped to $5. And sometimes they're even limp and soggy. While American consumers are paying more for smaller portions, Canada isn't sticking around to argue. The land of the maple leaf is now turning its gaze across the ocean, signing trade deals with Asian countries worth up to $1.6 billion. Perhaps potatoes aren't really being stopped at the border. They're simply finding another route, quietly and decisively. Will this path lead to new partnerships or to a growing divide? Let's find out in today's video. Please note, this video is based on publicly available information and independent analysis. Its purpose is to offer a broader perspective and does not represent the views of any organization, individual, or government. All statements presented are intended for informational and discussion purposes only and should not be interpreted as absolute claims. Viewers are encouraged to consult additional sources to form a more complete understanding. Few trade flows between Canada and the US have been as steady as the daily convoys of refrigerated trucks carrying PEI potatoes across the border for decades. Since bilateral trade agreements were strengthened, Canadian potatoes, especially from Prince Edward Island and New Brunswick, have become the golden standard for French fries in many northern US states. Fertile red soil, cool climate, and longer growing seasons produce potatoes with starch content, crispness, and color that chefs find hard to match elsewhere. The 350,000 tons exported in 2024 may sound like just a statistic, but for many, it's tied to meals and habits deeply embedded in daily life. That volume could serve about 17 million US households each year, spreading economic value to thousands of workers, from farmers and processing plant employees to truck drivers and restaurant staff. In both countries, this relationship has been more than just a transaction. It's part of the North American food system. Before 2025, the potato transport route from Canada to the US operated like a seamless trade pipeline. Refrigerated trucks crossed the border almost daily, giving American importers confidence in both quality and delivery times. This reliability allowed them to keep menus and service standards consistent for years. But in 2025, when the US slapped a 35% import tariff on Canadian potatoes, that supply chain was nearly snapped overnight. In just the second quarter of 2025, exports fell about 41%, a drop rarely seen since the 1980s. For many, this wasn't just a reduction in volume, it was a loss of connection between supplier and consumer after decades of trust. Previously, a $22 bag of potatoes might have been a weekly staple. After the 35% tariff shock, that price crept up to around $30. An $8 difference might seem small on a receipt, but for a family buying 2 bags a week, that's an extra $16 weekly, about $64 a month, or roughly $750 to $800 a year. For retirees living on fixed incomes, $64 a month can mean trade-offs. Skipping a gas fill-up, cutting back on a cafe visit, or switching from a familiar brand to a store brand version. This raises a question. If a food habit built over generations can be disrupted by a single tax policy, what does that say about the durability of this trade relationship? Can lost trade bridges be rebuilt fully, or will cracks of mistrust remain? Cracks that, at times, even time itself can't mend. It seems what began on trade paperwork in Washington quickly found its way to dinner tables in small Midwestern towns. The 35% import tariff, announced as a measure to ensure fair trade and protect domestic producers, applied across the board to all Canadian potato products, fresh, frozen, seed, and processed. With no negotiation period or advance warning, many ongoing contracts were hit with extra costs immediately, as if someone had suddenly tightened the valve on a steady flowing pipeline. In numbers, a 25-ton shipment of frozen French fries valued at $32,000 now faced about $11,200 in added tariffs, nearly a one-third increase in import costs. In less than a quarter, the average price of fries at eateries reportedly rose from around $3.50 to over $5.20. This increase didn't just hit fries. It rippled into fast food, combos, diner plates, and ready-to-eat supermarket foods. As costs climbed, many restaurants, especially small chains and family diners, switched from Canadian potatoes to cheaper domestic supplies. But for those accustomed to PEI in potatoes, the difference was noticeable. Crispness didn't last as long, color was less uniform, and sometimes there was a faint preservative aftertaste. These changes affected not only flavor, but also the dining experience. Customers felt they were getting something not quite the same. Small restaurant owners faced a dilemma: raise prices and risk losing customers, or keep prices and shrink portions. Many opted for the latter, turning a $10 order of 3 plates of fries into just 1.5, shrinking the eating experience. One regular in Wisconsin said, "I'm paying $5 for fries that taste like wet cardboard. I used to eat here twice a week. Now I bring lunch from home." Such stories aren't rare, with noticeable drops in repeat customers at places once popular for their Canadian fries. Put into everyday terms, the picture becomes clearer. Before, at a family diner in Iowa or Minnesota, $3.50 could get you a hot, crispy portion of fries, just the right taste and price, often served alongside a soft burger from chains like Culver's or Wendy's. Now, with the average price closer to $5.25 to $5.25, a $10 bill that once comfortably covered 2 orders for 2 people barely stretches to less than 2 full portions. Previously, $10 could buy nearly 3 portions. Now it's closer to 2. For an older couple visiting twice a week, the $1.75 per person difference quietly adds up to about $14 a month, roughly $170 a year. For many seniors on pensions, that's enough reason to rethink habits, cutting back on outings, cooking more at home, or opting for smaller portions, much like customers at Denny's or Applebee's now do to keep budgets in check. In supermarkets, the pattern is repeating. A frozen potato bag that once cost around $22 now hovers near $30. For a family buying 2 bags a week, the $8 per bag jump means an extra $16 weekly, about $64 a month. For many Midwest retirees, that $64 is the difference between keeping utility bills steady or turning down the heat for a winter evening. Faced with that choice, would you be willing to pay the difference? Before the tariff changes, Canada's potato industry, particularly in Prince Edward Island, New Brunswick, and Alberta, seemed to operate on a stable track. Many farms relied on long-term contracts with major processing corporations like McCain or Cavendish, which allowed them to maintain year-round production with little worry about seasonal volatility. For many growers, the US market made up the bulk of their revenue, creating an almost complete dependence on a single customer south of the border. When the US imposed a 35% import tariff, large processing companies appeared to respond quickly by scaling back production for the American market and reducing orders from farmers. Without public announcements, cold storage facilities in Prince Edward Island, New Brunswick, and Alberta began to look sparse. Contracts that once guaranteed an outlet were now reduced in volume or outright cancelled, placing immediate financial pressure on many farming families. The effects rippled quickly back to the fields. Many small and medium-sized farms were forced to cut planting areas by 15 to 25% for the 2025 season. Not due to drought or pests, but because their largest market had vanished. Some shifted entirely to shorter cycle crops with easier sales, while others leased out land to minimize risk. On many farms, tractors sat idle, and rows of Grade 1 potatoes, once destined for export, lay stacked with no buyers. For older farmers, the strain of bank loans and equipment maintenance costs has reportedly pushed some to consider selling their farms. Grade 2 potatoes, once sold to the livestock feed sector, now face the prospect of sitting in storage for months, losing significant value. The impact doesn't seem to stop at the farm gate. Fertilizer suppliers, seed vendors, and machinery repair services in these regions have also begun losing customers, causing their own revenues to decline. Towns dependent on the potato season are starting to feel the slowdown. Grocery stores see fewer shoppers, gas stations are quieter, and local diners are less crowded. On the US side, with Canadian supply dwindling, importers have been forced to turn to domestic potatoes. The resulting drop in product quality has led to complaints from restaurant patrons, which in turn has hurt sales for these businesses. This raises a sobering question. When a major export market can disappear in just a few months, surplus crops are no longer a sign of prosperity, but a reminder of the fragility of the entire supply chain. And is relying so heavily on a single buyer a strategic risk that Canada's agriculture sector needs to reconsider for the future? After the 35% tariff shock from the US, Canada's response seemed anything but confrontational. Instead of retaliating, which could have triggered unpredictable fallout for the broader economy, Canada appears to have taken a more measured approach, reinforcing its domestic market and seeking new customers beyond North America. With a trade tradition built on stability and long-term planning, this strategy likely helped avoid an escalation while protecting both farmers and domestic consumers. According to multiple sources, many processing companies quickly adjusted, diverting most of the harvested potatoes to the domestic market. Much of the crop was repackaged into 20-pound bags, a size convenient for families and easily distributed through supermarkets, co-ops, and retail stores. Some businesses even developed direct farm-to-shelf distribution channels, cutting out middlemen and reducing transport costs, which helped keep retail prices in check. As processors shifted to the domestic market, repackaging into 20-pound bags and moving goods directly from farm to shelf, retail prices appeared to hold steady at around $4.50 to $4.99 per bag. Compared to the US, where a familiar bag has jumped from about $22 to nearly $30, Canadian shoppers have likely avoided a sticker shock they would immediately notice at checkout. When put into a weekly grocery basket, the difference becomes easier to picture. Suppose a family buys one 20-pound bag a week. At $4.75 per bag, the monthly potato bill is about $19. If Canada had seen the same $8 per bag price hike as across the border, that bill could have risen to roughly $32 a month, or about $380 a year. For retirees living on fixed incomes, $32 a month is a real trade-off. One less tank of gas, switching from a preferred brand to a store brand, or delaying a bottle of joint supplements until next month. By contrast, with 20-pound bags still holding at $4.50 to $4.99, a $20 bill at the supermarket can still cover a bag of potatoes, a loaf of bread, and possibly a litre of milk. 3 staples for plenty of simple weeknight dinners. The surplus, estimated at over 12,000 tonnes in just Q2 2025, also didn't go to waste. In New Brunswick and Manitoba, government, businesses, and non-profits work together to direct the excess to food banks, community kitchens, nursing homes, and rural schools. This was not only a way to clear stock, but also a meaningful form of support for communities with limited incomes. One family in Manitoba illustrates the point. Thanks to stable potato prices, they save about $5 a week, just enough to buy extra milk and bread. For many households, that small saving carries big meaning. helping them maintain fuller meals amid rising living costs. In the long run, this approach seems to deliver layered benefits, helping farmers move their products, reducing waste, and deepening the bond between communities and the agricultural sector. When consumers see tangible value from domestic goods, they may develop a habit of supporting local products, reducing the nation's dependence on a single export market. After the US market slumped sharply under the impact of the 35% tariff, Canada's potato industry didn't seem to pour all its resources into instantly regaining lost market share. Instead, another path appears to have been taken, seeking markets with strong demand for high-quality processed products, where consumers are willing to pay for stability, traceability, and strict food safety standards. The aim seems to be risk diversification, reducing reliance on a single major customer, and tapping into the potential of fast-growing regions. The turning point came in 2025, when Canada signed a $1.6 billion trade agreement with Japan, South Korea, and Indonesia. The focus of this cooperation is said to be on premium processed potato products, frozen potatoes, and export standard packaged goods. Compared to many international competitors, Canada appears to be leaning on its advantages in quality, safety standards, and traceability, elements it has cultivated over decades of producing for demanding markets. Early figures suggest a positive trend. In 2024 alone, Prince Edward Island exported roughly $8 million worth of fresh potatoes to Indonesia, with steady growth signals. According to multiple sources, Thailand has surpassed others to become the largest importer of fresh and seed potatoes outside the US, reaching over $4 million. In the Caribbean, Trinidad and Panama each consumed more than $13 million, clearly reflecting the region's potential for Canadian potatoes. Domestically, the effects of these new contracts seem to reach across multiple links in the chain. One story from Charlottetown, where a factory signed a deal with a Japanese partner, added a new production line, and created 45 full-time jobs, illustrates the employment leverage that processed exports can bring. Another encouraging sign is that Grade 2 potatoes, once sold cheaply for livestock feed, are now being pulled into frozen processing lines, turning waste into product and reducing loss. For farmers, even without immediately expanding planting acreage, simply having steadier outlets for their harvest appears to smooth out cash flow, especially as the new season approaches. From a social and supply chain perspective, this direction could give farmers more stable outlets, even for produce that doesn't meet Grade 1 standards. Market expansion also seems to be motivating the processing sector to invest in modern storage and packaging technology. Atlantic and Quebec ports and logistics services are likewise benefiting from the increased volume of goods heading to Asia and the Caribbean. Still, the journey is far from smooth. From a business standpoint, profitability is tightly tied to logistics. Shipping to Tokyo or Jakarta is said to cost 20 to 35% more per ton than trucking to Buffalo. If we take a shipment worth $32,000 as a benchmark, a 20% increase means an extra $6,400. 35% means an extra $11,200. A thought-provoking match to the $11,200 surcharge from the 35% US tariff in the earlier example. In this case, the cost of avoiding tariffs in Market A may have simply turned into the cost of long-haul deep cold in Market B. The difference is that Asian customers may be willing to pay for premium segments. But that margin seems to be eroded by cold storage, extended transit times, and the limited frequency of refrigerated vessels and containers. From a reflective viewpoint, this detour seems to be creating a new layer of defense for Canada's potato industry. Less dependence on a single gateway, more footholds in multiple ones. But to turn that layer into a true fortress, investment in cold ports, shipping routes, transshipment warehouses, operational standards, and international marketing will likely need to be sustained for many years. On paper, expanding into Asian markets might seem like a sound step to reduce dependence on the US. However, digging into the reality reveals bottlenecks that highlight the limits Canada's potato sector must contend with. The first issue seems to lie in logistics costs. Shipping 1 ton of potatoes from Canada to major hubs like Tokyo or Jakarta can cost 20% to 35% more than transporting it overland to Buffalo. The longer distance often requires sea freight or specialized air cargo, with uninterrupted cold storage to maintain quality. Yet the number of direct refrigerated sailings or cargo holds from Canada to Asia remains limited, making it hard to bring unit costs down. From a trade perspective, this could make the product less competitive without supply chain support or efficiency improvements. Beyond costs, legal barriers also appear to be a significant hurdle. Although Canada and South Korea have a free trade agreement, the market still seems closed to fresh Canadian potatoes due to strict quarantine rules. This means fresh potatoes risk being held at customs or even re-exported. Only frozen processed products, such as fries, are currently allowed. In the long run, this could limit product diversification and make it harder for Canada to fully tap the potential of this market. Another issue is the gap between large corporations and small farms. Giants like McCain typically have the resources to invest in cold storage, secure international shipping space, and negotiate directly with foreign partners. In contrast, medium and small farms are almost entirely dependent on processors' buying decisions, from target markets and sale prices to delivery timelines. This dependency leaves them reactive and vulnerable when market strategies shift. For small-scale producers, each shipment to Asia isn't just a commercial transaction, it's also a risky investment. Packaging, storage, and freight costs must be paid up front, while payment may take weeks or even months to arrive. This can strain cash flow, especially if the new planting season is approaching and capital hasn't yet cycled back. In theory, expanding into international markets is a reasonable move to spread risk. But for smaller farmers, reality can mean long stretches of waiting. For contracts, for ships, for payment, all while farm operating costs keep rising. The question is whether this strategy serves producers across the board, or whether most of the benefits will concentrate in corporations already capable of going global. By July 2025, the numbers told the story. Canadian potato exports to the US dropped 41.7%, and total US potato imports fell 19%. This is more than just a set of statistics or a few redirected shipments. It seems to be a reminder that North American trade is losing its most valuable foundation: trust. Somewhere in a Midwest town, a family diner still glows with warm yellow light, but the chairs outnumber the customers. Thousands of miles away, containers of Canadian potatoes quietly leave Halifax or Vancouver, bound for Tokyo, Seoul, and Singapore. On one side, a gap in the familiar American menu. On the other, new opportunities unfolding in Asia. Is this merely a temporary pause before Canada and the US return to the negotiating table? Or is it the beginning of a quiet breakup that could last decades? And if so, who will bear the true cost? What do you think? Have you noticed the change when buying potatoes for your family meals? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your stories.